Hey everyone, this is Danny. Thank you so much for tuning in with me. This is episode number 292. Thank you for being on another one with me here. I will say just at the start of this, if you haven't subscribed on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on, I would ask you to do that. It keeps you notified when new episodes come up. And if you would also not mind to take the time to share these episodes with someone you know, friends, family, so we can increase visibility on different platforms, I would be grateful for that. And hopefully these little short teachings can be found worthwhile, and the message of Jesus Christ gets spread further and further as we go along. So I would appreciate those efforts if you are so willing. Now, today's episode is kind of a short observation that I came across in some reading. I want to pass that on to you, and I'm going to read the portion of Scripture that it comes through and give you a bit of a taste of the scene, some maybe context. And so we'll read out of John chapter 8. I'll start reading in verse 12, reading all the way through verse 20. And it says, "Again, Jesus spoke to them, saying, 'I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life.' So the Pharisees said to him, 'You are bearing witness about yourself. Your testimony is not true.' Jesus answered, 'Even if I do bear witness about myself, my testimony is true, for I know where I came from and where I am going. But you do not know where I come from or where I am going. You judge according to the flesh. I judge no one. Yet even if I do judge, my judgment is true, for it is not I alone who judge, but I and the Father who sent me. In your law it is written that the testimony of two men is true. I am the one who bears witness about myself, and the Father who sent me bears witness about me.' They said to him, therefore, 'Where is your Father?' Jesus answered, 'You know neither me nor my Father. If you knew me, you would know my Father also.' These words he spoke in the treasury as he taught in the temple, but no one arrested him because his hour had not yet come." So I've titled this kind of observation, "Where is your Father?" Now, while reading this text, the significance of the religious leaders' question strikes me. They asked Jesus in John 8:19, "Where is your Father?" Now, this has significance as I see it for many reasons. At face value, the simple question can be skimmed over as a just simple response to Jesus bringing up his Father from verse 16. Yet even if I do judge, my judgment is true, for it is not I alone who judge, but I and the Father who sent me, he says. Also in verse 17, it says, "In your law it is written about that the testimony of two people is true. I am the one who bears witness about myself, and the Father who sent me bears witness about me." Now, I see the question, "Where is your Father?" as both a personal stab and also a revealing spiritual condition inquiry from these religious leaders. Now, as a personal stab against Jesus, these religious leaders have very likely heard about Jesus. They may have seen him in action, and very likely they have asked plenty of questions amongst themselves and have learned quite a bit about his family history. Very possibly even, they knew the status of Jesus' earthly father. Now, there is a general consensus that Joseph, his earthly father, had died sometime between Jesus' age of 12 and right before his public ministry. However, this is speculative because the Bible doesn't provide a definitive statement. So, with all the talk of Father from Jesus, for the leaders to ask Jesus, "Where is your Father?" How does that strike you if they know the answer to the question, only to ask it in a way that slings mud in his face or to even bring sadness to his heart regarding the situation, the circumstances of what has happened with his earthly father? If they ask the question, "Where is your father?" with a snarkiness, does that add a layer of dynamic to this encounter? Now, to be fair, I will concede the possibility that they do not know the situation surrounding Jesus' earthly father. But it does seem unlikely that, this is referencing Matthew 13:54, in his own hometown and teaching in his own hometown synagogue that we read elsewhere in Matthew 13:54, that word hasn't traveled to surrounding areas about Jesus' family history. In Matthew 13, we see that the people are in awe and, isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't this Mary, who is his mother, and his brothers, they name by name, and even his sisters? So they are well acquainted who this person is. I find it interesting that Joseph isn't even called out by name. He's just referred to as the carpenter's son. That is peculiar to me. The sisters don't get named, but the sons do. His mother does. In a culture where women didn't get the mention that they would today, it is odd that Joseph, the earthly father, is not even, his name's not even mentioned there. I think that's peculiar. But I bring up Matthew 13 to just suggest or propose that I find it odd that word wouldn't have circulated regarding this person, this individual who is really shaking things up, who is turning things on its head and doing great works and signs that people find incredible. How is it that the word hasn't traveled? So that is kind of an imaginative consideration. If they in fact knew who his father or earthly father was, what if that question is targeting perhaps the controversy that is attached to the status of his father, his earthly father? Where is your father? No doubt there was still, even through past beyond the birth of Jesus, but into his childhood, teen years, adult life, no doubt there was some stigma or some whispers and gossip about the status of his father. Not everyone had a revelation of what Mary knew and Joseph knew about this, the status of who his father was. So no doubt there was some stigma there. And if that question is targeting Jesus in a way of, sleight of hand, of slinging mud, who is your father? As though to say, do you even know who your father is? Or if the circumstances surrounding Joseph's absence could be potentially controversial, are they reminding him of that? So it's very underhanded. It's very passive aggressive. I see there as a potential. Now, the leader's question again, where is your father? Also, I see reveals a spiritual condition of their own hearts. Jesus says in John 8:18, in the second part of the sentence, my other witness is the Father who sent me. Now, essentially, they are saying, where is this second witness that you say establishes your credibility? This is something also the leaders are suggesting. Now, Jesus points out to the leaders, he says, in your own law, it is written that the testimony of two witnesses is true. That's John 8:17, like we read earlier. We can recall that in Numbers 35:30, it says, if anyone kills a person, the murderer shall be put to death on the evidence of witnesses, but no person shall be put to death on the testimony of one witness. This establishes that at least two witnesses are needed to satisfy this law's requirement. Also, notice in Deuteronomy 17:6, it gives explicit numeric requirement in saying, quote, on the evidence of two witnesses or of three witnesses, the one who is to die shall be put to death. A person shall not be put to death on the evidence of one witness. Also, we see in Deuteronomy 19:15, which says, a single witness shall not suffice against a person for any crime or for any wrong in connection with any offense that he has committed. Only on the evidence of two witnesses or of three witnesses shall a charge be established. Now, I find it necessary to say that we do know the compromised potential that this law rule has. Think Ahab and Jezebel regarding Naboth's vineyard, this manufacturing of false testimony. There is inherent within it the compromised potential for manipulating this law. If two people essentially agreed on a lie, that does not make it truth. And this is evidenced also in the mock trial of Jesus. Who can accuse Jesus of sin? In Matthew 26:60 and 61, it says, but they did not find any, that is false evidence, though many false witnesses came forward. Finally, two came forward and declared, this fellow, which, what an understatement if there ever was one, this fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days. Now, is this what Jesus said? Well, no, we find it in John 2:19, in Jesus saying, Jesus answered them, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Now, the author, John, establishes that the temple that Jesus was speaking of was his body. So we know that Jesus wasn't speaking of the temple. He was speaking of this temple, his body. So we know that these two witnesses' testimony was a distortion and a misrepresentation of truth. Now, as I was putting this together, it stuck out to me in reviewing John 2:19, when Jesus says, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. The basis of these two witnesses that came forward and quoted him, or should we say misquoted him, are referenced in the encounter that happens in John 2, in that proximity of 21. I'm just going to read a short portion. This is a side note, really, of of something that I am ever kind of aware of, if you will, something that's always kind of in the back of my mind. So Jesus, the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus was went up to Jerusalem, and we find him in the temple, and he found those who were selling sheep and oxen and pigeons and money changers, and he makes a whip out of cords, and he drives them out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen. He pours out the coins, the money changers, he overturns the tables, and he told those who sold the pigeons, "Take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of trade." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." So the Jews said to him, "What sign do you show us for doing these things?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and will you raise it up in 3 days?" But he was not speaking about the temple of his but he was, speaking about the temple of his body. Now, I often hear, and I'm sure you often hear, references to, when we are reading Scripture, doing so using understanding in context. And I'm not an advocate against context. It is important. It can shift and change things. And things can be taken out of context. There's no question here. But I would also inject here, keep in mind what's just happened. Jesus is in the temple, the courts. He's driving out these, the economic or commerce system that is attached to sacrifice. He's driving it out. He's telling them this should be a house of prayer, not of commerce or trade. If Jesus makes this statement, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. If you are there hearing him in context of being in the temple courts, and he says, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. If we are to conclude what he is saying based on the context, the surrounding context, we would likely also conclude him to be speaking of the temple in which he is standing, rather than speaking of a different context, that is, the earthly body that houses the Spirit of God. Destroy this temple, and destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. I would just inject, don't be too chained to context in understanding things. In context here, Jesus was in the temple courts driving out commerce. This was in context. But here he was speaking about a physical temple of his body. So, though context is valuable and a part of the process for understanding things in some instances, we can be too context-driven and can actually find ourselves in misunderstanding because we are allowing context to be the sole decision maker of the process, rather than letting the Spirit of God lead us into truth, who is himself truth. So I would just add to that little snippet, if you will. These two witnesses' testimony was a distortion, a misrepresentation of the actual truth. So back to the point of Jesus establishing in John 8:17, in your own law, it is written that the testimony of two witnesses is true. Now we can see that below the surface, the testimony of two witnesses as it relates to the law, what we read previously, establishes a basis of accusation. Jesus is using their own standard for truth back on them. Not only are they violating their own standard for not accepting the testimony of who Jesus is, but they are creating a double standard by accepting the testimony of another in their own name. We find that in John 5:43, which says, Jesus speaking, "I have come in my Father's name, and you do not accept me. But if someone else comes in his own name, you will accept him." Jesus is revealing their double-mindedness, their contradictoriness, and distortedness regarding the things of God. And Jesus takes this one step further when he says, "If you knew me, you would know my Father also." It's John 8:19. He is essentially saying, because you don't know me, you don't know the Father who sent me. Now this is a cutting blow to the supposed spiritual elite. The very ones who should know God don't know him at all because they do not know the one he sent. Out of their very own mouths, "Who is your Father?" reveals that they do not know God. Now, I'll close this out with just another additional side note. At the end of this passage we read in John 8:20, it clarifies a little bit of the scene. It says, "These words he spoke in the treasury as he taught in the temple." These words he spoke in the treasury as he taught in the temple. Now, I think this is no coincidence that he was speaking these words in the treasury. It's very specific about that detail, very specific. And I think it's no coincidence that he was speaking these words in the treasury. A pearl of great price, speaking of knowing himself and knowing the Father, standing in the very place in which they keep treasures. They did not have the eyes to see that he himself was treasure, the pearl of great price to be discovered. And that which he spoke of knowing him and the Father is worth more than all the treasures of the world can be contained within its treasure chests. So thank you so much for being with me on this next episode. Please subscribe and share this so we can get the word out across really across the world as it is already going. I'm continuously in awe of how God has spread this. It's reaching places that I could never go or may never go, and I'm thankful for it. I'm thankful for his work and thankful for you all who tune in and hopefully, I pray, find value and insight into the treasure that is God's word, his speaking, his presence, his intimacy, and eagerly share that with all who will listen. So thank you so much for being with me. Look forward to the next one. God bless.